The whole idea of the holiday season, it's going to be here before we know it. And it always ends up being a more stressful thing than it needs to be. There's just a lot of pressure that comes with it. So I'm glad to
Hmm.
have you here to pick your brain. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners and we'll get into it.
Sure. My name is Niro Feliciano. I've been a psychotherapist for the last 20 years, and now I write books. I do speaking events, and I'm on the Today Show pretty much once a month,
Yeah.
talking about wellness and parenting.
Yes. And you did have your other book, which remind me of the title of that
Yes.
one.
It's called This Book Won't Make You Happy. It's the
That's right.
difference between happiness and contentment, and the
Yes.
practices that foster contentment. And this new book, All Is Calmish, the one for the holidays,
Hmm.
has similar concepts. It is all about
Yes.
finding meaning during the holidays and really contentment, feeling content during the holidays.
Yes. Well, let's just dive into my first question. I always ask people, why did you choose to write this book? But I guess why was that personal to you? The idea of
Mm.
all being more calmish. Have you had tendencies in the past of feeling overwhelmed by the holidays, or was this something that you were seeing in the clients that you talk with? I'll let you have the floor.
All of the above. All of the above.
Okay.
For sure, the hardest time of the year for my clients, because when you are going through something, it doesn't stop for the holidays. It doesn't give
Yeah.
you grace to get through the
Mm.
holidays, so the holidays become harder. And especially it's a time where everything around you is telling you that you should feel joyful. And if you don't, it can be a harder time of year. You're more aware of it. And then for myself, in addition to a practice and all the things that I do professionally, I have 4 children. So
Mm.
that has always been a tough time of year, just trying to manage our regular to-do list and our regular life. And I always say it doesn't matter if you have 4 children or no children. Everyone is busy. We've all
Mhm.
learned to live our life to maximum bandwidth. So you put all the things that not only you're expected to do during the holidays, but that you want to do. You want to create a beautiful experience for yourself and your family. And it can become overwhelming in terms of the amount of time we have to do it.
Absolutely. I think it's just so interesting that as a psychotherapist that this is a topic that you want to talk about because there is so much more buried underneath the surface of this
Mm,
season. I just spoke to someone, the episode will air a couple weeks after yours goes live, but we were talking about grief. And I
mm,
wanted to make sure that we talked about grief during the holiday season
yes.
because not being able to personally speak to it, but I'm like, oh, this is a time of year that brings up probably a lot of deep sadness. So I just think it's great to have you speaking to this subject because you're probably kind of wading through those waters with people.
I am. And it was really important to me that I had someone's voice in the book who knew grief firsthand. And I did
Yeah.
that in my first book too, because I live in Connecticut and I lived at the time of Sandy Hook about 15 minutes away from Sandy Hook.
Wow.
So I
Yeah.
worked with a lot of those families. And if you remember, that happened right before Christmas. So that was a Christmas that we all felt grief that year. But a good friend of mine, 4 years ago, lost her husband very suddenly in an accident. And she had 3 children from the ages 13 through 7. 2 of them were very good friends, are still very good friends with my kids. So she talked about how she navigated the holidays because the holidays were really important to her family, but they changed really drastically overnight. And she shared really good advice for people who are navigating grief. And I think we're at the point where we might not be navigating grief, but most of us know someone who is. And I
Mhm.
felt like it's important, especially being the holidays, that we know how to support those people too. And the one thing I would say to people who are in the midst of grief is that you have to honor your grief. You don't have to do things the way you've always done. It's
Mhm.
important to know who your people are and who you can actually be yourself with and not pretend. And even in the midst of that, you can feel both things. You can feel grief, and there also may be moments where you experience joy.
Mhm.
So leave room to feel however you're going to feel. Don't feel bad if you're going to make plans and not feel like doing it at the last minute. That is the grief process. But I talk a lot more about it in the book
Yeah. Yeah.
specifically.
What is your thought on forcing holiday cheer?
Mm,
Kind of like, in a
mhm.
sense, fake it till you make it, but
Yeah.
that can also be draining. So I'll have you speak to that.
Yeah, I have two different thoughts when it comes to that.
Okay.
And part of it comes from a modality of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy. And there is a technique in dialectical behavioral therapy called opposite action. So to act
Mm.
opposite the way you feel. And it utilized this concept called behavioral activation. When we act that way, our behavior actually can change. So, for example, if we're really feeling grumpy, just smile, and you don't feel like it, but there's something in smiling that releases tension. And
Yeah.
oftentimes the feelings will follow the action. So that is more of a skill that you can try to utilize at different times when you're feeling tired or a little bit down, and see if it works for you. However, that is not to say we bypass those feelings. And I think we have to realize, what are we feeling right now? Do we even ask ourselves that during the holidays? Or are we just on autopilot? What's the next thing I
Mhm.
have to get done? And the next thing. But how do I feel? Am I exhausted? Do I need to step back? Do I need to take a rest? Do I need to lay down on my couch for 15 minutes and just close
Mhm.
my eyes before I do the next thing? Or is there something heavier there, sadness or anxiety, because I'm about to see people who I don't really feel comfortable around, family that are not good for my nervous system. So
Yeah.
I think it's also important to get in touch with how we're really feeling, and then really care for ourselves, take care of ourselves in that moment. And
Yeah.
again, it's a longer conversation, but I talk about all those situations that might make us feel like that during the holidays, and give people very practical, tangible things that don't take long, that they can do fairly quickly.
Mhm. Yes, I love the way you've broken down the book. It's just really easily digestible in these quicker chapters, and you can kind
Thank
of
you.
even pinpoint which one might, as you're looking through the table of contents, like, oh, I really identify this, and kind of go right to it. But I'm
Yes.
wondering, you mentioned maybe we feel anxious around certain family members.
Mm.
Luckily, we're not in an election year. Usually those years are
Yeah.
can be a little bit more tense.
Although
But
that is coming up. I mean,
that's
even
true.
I just went to our local bookstore to sign books, and the first thing the woman said to me, because I have a big live event coming up,
Uh-huh.
in-person event, she goes, "Are you going to talk about politics? And are you going to talk about how it makes us feel around the table?" And I said, "Well, I don't think I'm going to bring that up at my holiday event, but I will talk about how do we manage family where we have very different viewpoints on these situations that trigger us, in the genuine sense of the word trigger, right?"
Yeah, I would love
Yeah.
for you to speak to that, even just briefly here, because
Yeah.
that is a big concern for so many people when it's contentious.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, I think there are many things we have to consider in those situations. And one, recognize we can only control ourselves. We
Yeah.
can't control the other person. So we can choose to regulate our emotions in that moment by doing the breathing, stepping out of the situation. I always say don't take the bait, not during the
Mhm.
holiday, because a lot of times people want to engage and they will fuel off your reaction, right? And if we are able to kind of step back and say, this is not worth it this holiday, it may be the type of person where you can reach out before and say, hey, I know that this has come up in the past. Can we just keep the peace this holiday? I think everybody just wants to have a peaceful holiday. Can we talk about it some other time? For
Mhm.
many relatives, you don't have that relationship. You can't control what they're going to say, nor are they of the mindset of wanting to keep the peace, so to speak. They'd rather want to be, they want to make their viewpoints known. So in that case, I would say have some plans at, ready to go, in that, all right, this is how I'm going to change the subject if it comes up.
Mhm.
I'm going to leave the room if it comes up, or I may have to, if it's a really toxic situation, set some boundaries beforehand and say, if this comes up, if it's uncomfortable, we may not be able to gather any
Mhm.
longer as a family. Some situations necessitate those boundaries. And if it's
Mhm.
something that can get really difficult to handle, maybe you choose to do things differently that year. If
Mhm.
there's really, you don't see a solution to it, maybe you decide this is the year we're going to do Thanksgiving or Christmas or Hanukkah a little bit different.
Sure. I do think, as a general statement, like
Mhm.
sometimes the older generations, they might not be as filtered. And I think if you add the combination of alcohol into that mix, if
Oh,
people are
yes.
drinking throughout the day,
Yeah.
and or maybe people aren't going to mention that right when you start to gather, but as the day gets on, people become more comfortable. And so maybe just having that awareness of, okay, this person might try and get my goat towards the end of the day. And I know this is so cliche and it maybe even childlike to say, but it's like, you can be the better person. You can have the
Mm.
emotional maturity to say, I know that this person speaking in this way or saying this thing, it just says more about them than it does about me. And I'm going to be more emotionally mature. And that's hard to do. I just have to like talk myself through those moments.
I think it works. And my
Yeah.
daughter will say to me, this is my daughter who just left for college this fall. She said, I will say, that's an issue. That's not an ish me. And I
Mm,
loved that
love
because
that.
it is their issue. It's not yours. And you can decide not to engage in it. And I think taking that bigger picture perspective, one thing I like to ask when I'm looking at a person who has those behaviors is what happened to them in their life that made it
Hmm.
okay for them to act like this. Just zoom out a little and see, what did something go on in their family? Are they going through something right now that has made them more reactive? So we depersonalize the situation and not make it about ourselves, but try and
Hmm.
find out what happened to them that has resulted in the behavior we're seeing today.
No, 100%, absolutely. I would love to know before maybe going into some practices that we can set into place as we navigate through these next
Mhm.
weeks. I would love to know, do you think there's a myth, so to speak, of the holiday season that you just wish people would let go of?
That we need to do all the things in order for it to be memorable and beautiful. And
Hmm.
I am just coming off a wellness retreat that I did.
Oh,
It was actually really amazing. It was on the Danube River in
oh, wow.
Europe, and I was with 150 women at this wellness retreat. And it was amazing to me how so many women came up to me and said, we appreciate that you gave us permission to do less. We just
Hmm.
needed to hear it. And I always think, we do holidays a certain way. We want to keep up traditions. And we just tend on autopilot to do the same things every year. But I think we need to look at where we are in our life right now, this particular year, and say, okay, what will be difficult for me this year? What do I really want to put my energy into that's going to be meaningful? Because that may look different from year to year. Your family
Hmm.
might look different this year. Your finances might look different this year. You may have to do it differently, and that's okay. And one of the things I encourage everybody to do is sit down with your family before the holiday and ask each person, okay, what are those things that make this holiday meaningful to you? What are the can't miss things? What are the things you want to make sure that we do? And listen to what they have to say. And when I've done that with my family, I've been surprised at how simple some of the things are. Movie night in our
Sure.
PJs, like that is
Hmm.
what makes it memorable to them,
Hmm.
or we go out for a walk in our town, for the tree lighting. They love doing that. So that helps you to prioritize. But for many women too, I want them to sit down and ask themselves, what would bring me joy in this season?
Hmm.
What would bring me joy? And then when I know what that thing is, how do I set the boundaries to be able to do that? Right? Because if you're running around doing all the things for everybody else, at the end of it, there may be very little joy left for yourself. So I do want women to consider that this year in particular.
Absolutely. Let's quickly talk about those boundaries. Wonder if, as
Mm.
you're kind of going through the list of things that you want to take on this year and maybe some things you want to pass off, how do you have those conversations with individuals that want that load to still be yours to bear?
I know. So the individuals who say, no, you have to do all of it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that that's a boundary where you can say very gracefully, we are definitely going to do some of these things that make it memorable. But this year, I'm going to choose to do a little less so I could be more present with all of you and experience it with all of you. One thing that I say in the book is connection over perfection, because
Hmm.
oftentimes we're doing so much that what gets sacrificed is authentic connection where we feel present, where we feel a part of things. We're more still doing even in the moment. I remember those Christmas days where it's like, okay, you open the presents, now what we're going to do, I need to get the brunch ready, and you keep going until the end of the day and you're exhausted. But I think it's okay to say, there's some years where I've been able to do that, but this year might look a little different. But it is still going to be, or I should say, and it's still going to be a beautiful holiday.
Hmm.
You
Yeah, for
don't have to
sure.
necessarily wait for approval to do what's healthy for you and your
Hmm.
family, right? And sometimes
Hmm.
the approval doesn't come. So you have to make that choice.
I think sometimes it can be not even with your extended family, it can be with your partner, your spouse, on how do we compromise because we both have two very different ideas. I know for my husband and
Mm,
I, when we were first married, I I was like, oh, we're just going to stay with my parents on Christmas Eve, enjoy the morning with them. And he did that for a few years. And then our daughter, he even did that until my daughter was, I think, 3. And then he was like, no, this is our morning to spend together. We can go to your parents
Hmm.
after. But he was like, I really want the morning as a family now that we're establishing this unit here.
Right.
So the compromise was, sure, we'll do that here. And then we'll go to my parents. I have
Hmm.
a friend that for them, we used to travel all day on Christmas, but now we're like, hey, we're going to stay at our house. If anyone wants to come over, that's great. You're more than welcome. We want to see you. We don't have the capacity to go anymore. So I think there's
Yes.
ways to navigate that compromise, but any words of advice there?
That's a really common one, especially
Yeah.
as your kids get a little bit older and you realize, no, we want traditions in our house. We want them to
Mm-hmm.
remember that here. Yes. And I think we have to just have those conversations first and
Yeah.
not go into it hot, insisting that this is the way it's going to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But taking a moment, especially if you're faced with a perspective or a decision that you're not fully on board with, to think about, okay, why does this person want this? Why does my partner want this? Why is this important to them? And have we done things a different way all these years? Maybe the way I wanted to. Can I
Mm-hmm.
compromise it? And not only that, but what are the benefits to our family if we do it this way? And what are we sacrificing, right?
Mm.
And sometimes what we're sacrificing might be making other people happy at the expense of our own family, as well-being. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to look at not just what we do, but why do we do the things that we do? What has been the motivation for going to my in-laws' house every Christmas, right? When maybe people don't want to in the
Mm-hmm.
moment and we'd rather stay at home. And I think that gives us a little bit more empathy going into that conversation instead of being so fixed to this is how we're going to do it, which
Yeah.
can create a lot of tension. And that's not what we want during the holidays.
Yeah, absolutely. So outside of maybe writing down, I like to write things down. I
Yeah,
like to
me
see my
too.
month as a whole.
Yes.
But outside of doing that, knowing what it is that we want to take on, how can we protect our peace and our mind and our well-being and our health? Most
Mm,
importantly, our health, so we can actually get through all the things.
mhm,
What does that look like for you? For you, even I'm curious to know
mhm.
what you do.
I do write things down very much
Mm-hmm.
so. I like to see it. And the other
Mm-hmm.
thing we know is if we don't write it down, we will circulate those things in our brain and it will feel
Mm-hmm.
more overwhelming because our brain is only designed to remember 3 or 4 things at once. And
Mm-hmm.
when we try to take on more than that, we waste neuroenergy just trying to
Mm-hmm.
remember it that could be channeled into doing the thing productively. So I'm a big fan of writing down for that reason. And it doesn't feel as overwhelming when you see it on paper. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
it does, but less overwhelming. But I like to look at, okay, how is this going to look over the course of a day or a week? Where do I have moments where I think, okay, this might be exhausting. I might have to move things to another day. I might have to cancel something or reschedule it because it's going to be a really tough day for me. But I have some wellness practices that are non-negotiable. And part of that is because around the time my first book came out, as soon as I was done writing that, which was
Mm-hmm.
right around post-COVID time where, you
Mm.
know, everybody's family, especially if you had kids, was all over the place. They'd have to quarantine. We didn't know if they were going to
Mm-hmm.
go to school someday. So I was
Mm-hmm.
coming off of a good 7 months of high stress and I started having panic attacks. And the one thing I will say, especially to moms, is if you don't take care of your wellness, it can very much result in illness. And that's
Yeah.
what happened with me. So, one thing that I guard during the holidays is just a little bit of time in the morning once my kids are out the door or before they wake up. My kids are a little bit older, so they don't wake up as early as maybe if you have
Yeah.
little kids. And I just take a moment for silence and reflection and time to enjoy my coffee. And I do a little prayer and meditation during that time as well. And that centers me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I talk about in the book, there's a chapter called A Silent Morning, and it doesn't have to be in the morning, but what would that ritual of wellness, something that would bring you joy and bring you peace, look like for you? And can
Mm-hmm.
you incorporate it sometime in your day? It doesn't have to be morning, can be
Mm-hmm.
afternoon, can be the evening. I like to do it by my tree because that makes it
Mm-hmm.
feel a little magical. And the other thing I do is I walk with a friend at least a couple times a week because
Yeah.
that to me checks 2 boxes: connection. We know that we need that. And especially if you're a woman in midlife whose estrogen is fluctuating, that also
Mm-hmm.
means your oxytocin is fluctuating. We need that for our hormonal health. And
Mm-hmm.
when you connect with a friend like that, who you feel connected to, it releases oxytocin. It makes you feel good. So, and we're getting some exercise. So those are two wellness things that I prioritize, even during the holidays. And what I
Mhm.
like to say is, and I talk about this in the book, anything worth doing is worth doing a little. You can't take an hour walk with your friend, go for a 20-minute walk, meet your
Yeah.
friend in town, just connect, have a coffee somewhere. But those things, prioritizing those things is prioritizing your wellness, because we tend to feel better after we do those things.
Hmm. No, totally. I was going to say a brisk winter walk is something
Yeah.
that is kind of a non-negotiable. And it's fun too, because depending on where you're at, you can look at the pretty lights and it's just very
Yeah.
enjoyable and nostalgic feeling.
Or the windows that are decorated. And there is
Yeah.
something, there is research about the cold that helps us regulate our nervous system. If we're in fight or flight and we
Hmm.
expose ourselves to cold, it takes us out of that sympathetic activation and into the more relaxing state. So that could mean if you're anxious, if you're having a panic attack, you get in a cold shower or you use ice on your face or chest. But
Hmm.
walking brisk winter walks does that too. It reduces anxiety.
No, I love that. I love that we're speaking a lot more to the mind. I know throughout your book you have to holiday card or not,
Mhm.
and you have just some of the tangible things that I guess that we're navigating, like the experiences. But I love that you're speaking more to the mind and the reason behind the stress and how to navigate that. It's just a different perspective, I think, than
Mhm.
I've discussed on the podcast before, specifically because it is a minimalism podcast.
Right.
But it's like we've talked about those things. I have some episodes airing, some replays, but yeah, I'm just so glad that you're speaking to this.
I think it's important that we think about why we do what we do. And
Yeah.
especially, we're living in a culture, as you know, and I'm sure that you talk about, it comes up often, where we're told to be happy, we need to be bigger, better, and have more, right?
Mm.
And that's actually not the case. And we've seen as therapists, that is what's driving our rates of mental health illnesses up, especially for young people. So
Hmm.
thinking about, how do we simplify even during the holidays? You know, what, like I said, what are those three can't miss moments that we want to focus on and show up present for? And what can we let go of that no longer serves us anymore in this season? Now that either my kids are a little bit older, or I'm a little bit older, or we're navigating health issues or caregiving or whatever it might be, what can we let go of that would actually make this more joyful? I think those are questions we really have to ask in order to know what actions we have to take.
Hmm. What encouragement would you give to someone that it might be a little bit more like the normal holiday stress versus mental health overwhelm? How
Hmm.
would you encourage someone to navigate that? Would you say wait till the first of the year when all of it's out of the way? How would we navigate that on a day to day?
Meaning how to take care of your mental health while you're in the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, I would
Yeah.
say that, but I think sometimes it turns from normal holiday stress to mental health overwhelm. And
Mm,
and to me, you need to notice those yellow flags before you
yeah,
get to the all the red flags.
absolutely. You know, I think what we know when we're dealing with an actual mental health issue is we are having trouble living our life in a normal way. It begins to interfere with our daily workings of how we live our life. And that's when
Mhm.
we know we may be looking at something that's more than temporary. That's something that needs some sort of support or intervention. And I don't think it's good to wait until after the holidays to address it,
Mhm.
because it can get exacerbated with the holiday stress on top of it. You know, you can feel really overwhelmed to the point where you have debilitating paralysis. You know, you can't do anything or you don't enjoy anything in front of you.
Mhm.
Everything makes you reactive or anxious. That's when we need to begin to address it right now. And either what we say is there are many great resources, books, articles that you can look at how to deal with a specific issue. There's so much information available to us, and I offer some of those things in the book as well. But if
Mhm.
that is still overwhelming, too much to move the needle, then I say reach out to someone, to a professional who can help you. And it's amazing, even in one session when I sit with patients, they
Mhm.
just feel a relief having that in-person support and someone who says, I know what you're going through. I know how to walk you through it, you know, and you don't have
Yeah.
to figure it out on your own. For
Mhm.
those of us who it's holiday stress, I think we can look at, is this time limited? Are things going to change dramatically once this period of my life is over? And if you can say yes, then at least you can put it in perspective during the season.
Yeah, that's great advice. Kind of full circle is we were talking about how the holiday season just brings a lot up for people. We said grief,
Mm,
but I think, yeah, it's loneliness when you're in a room
yes.
full of people. You might be bearing that weight of loneliness, or
Mm,
the financial element to how are we going to provide a Christmas for everyone? And then we have to
yeah.
do all these parties. I need a new outfit. It's all of these things that do come up. So you go into so much more depth in your books. But is there one final word you want to leave with listeners before we wrap up?
I really want people to think about what would bring you joy and really sit
Mm,
with that. What does a meaningful holiday look like to you? And what is in my life right now, the way that I do holiday, that doesn't align with that vision?
mhm,
And I want to give permission to people to do it differently this year. That, I think, is one of the core tenets of the book, and also the way I have started to live my life. And part of that, I'll tell you, has become more real since my kids have started to leave going to college. My
mhm,
oldest left in the fall, and we're still
mhm.
very connected. She's in Boston, which is not far from Connecticut. But
Yeah.
you finally have an idea of what people say when they say it's so quick. And
Mm,
what I realized as we were in her senior year is that I don't want to miss it. And I felt like I missed a lot of it in her life just because we were so busy. We had kids all 2 years apart. And I
mhm,
thought, some of this I can't change, but some of it I can. That would
mhm.
allow me to be more present and connected. So
Yeah.
I also would love people to think about, what do you want to remember 5 years from now during the holiday? And what do you do that you're not going to remember, that actually no one remembers, that no one really cares about, but that we
Mhm,
stress out over? So
mhm,
just asking those questions, I think, is more valuable than me saying, this is what you should do, because it's going to be different for everybody. But I would
mhm,
love to have people think about that before we get into Thanksgiving, and just, we're off and running, so that we
mhm,
can be a little bit more intentional about what we decide to take on and what we
mhm.
decide to let go of in this season.
Yes, that intentionality piece is key. And I love how you said, what do the kids want from this? It
Mm,
might just be that movie night with popcorn. And that's one thing that I've suggested to people in the past is I just look at my three kids and I'm like, okay, what's one thing you want to do? Well, make sure we get these
yes.
three things done, if anything. And then anything else is a sprinkling on top of a beautiful
Yes.
season.
It's so smart, and I know that you live this way as well. And then as long as you hit a couple of those things that they want, they're happy. They've talked
Yeah.
about it. They
Hmm.
know that they can anticipate it, and that
Hmm.
will bring them joy. And I
Yeah.
think, especially as moms, we have to give ourselves grace. We're trying to
Yeah.
be a lot of things for a lot
Hmm.
of people. And
Hmm.
it's okay to say, you know what, we can do some, we don't have to do all, and it's still going to be beautiful.
100%. Well, where can listeners connect with you online and grab a copy of the book if they want to do so?
Well, they can get books wherever books are sold, any online retailer. It's in a lot of physical bookstores as well. And
Hmm.
they can connect with me at neurofeliciano.com. I write a newsletter probably twice a month. Right now it's every week, but twice a
Okay.
month.
Okay.
And because you are sending this out next week, we are doing a book club around this book, where I'm
Oh,
going to be on Instagram every, I believe it's Wednesday or Tuesday, talking about the book and the different parts that we've read. And then
okay.
we have a live book club in December where people can
Cool.
join on Zoom. So there, Instagram. And I'm on the Today Show pretty often. So if they go to today.com, they can look up the things that I've talked about over the last few seasons.
Cool. Yeah, we were saying that the episode's going live November 18th, and that's the day that the audiobook is available.
Yes.
So if they want to digest it as they're driving around in the commute, that would be a great way to listen as well.
And I love that you saw that the chapters are short and
Yeah.
digestible. I did 31 chapters for that reason. I didn't want to get to the holidays when people are so busy and say, here, on top of everything else, read a book. So
Sure.
it is meant to be read over 31 days. I
Hmm.
have people I know who read it within 3 days because it's a
Hmm.
fast read, but
Yeah.
it's really just to help us find that peace and perspective and reflect over a whole month during the
Yeah.
holidays. So no
Yeah.
pressure to read it all at once. Read what you need, but you can read it over time or
Sure.
listen to
Sure.
it over time.
Yes, but quickly
Yeah.
before we wrap up,
Mhm.
I'm just going to ask you the final two questions that I ask all my
Yeah.
guests. And the first one is, what has been a beneficial resource in your life that you want to share with the listeners?
There's so many, but I will say, because I used to write a column for Psychology Today,
Oh,
I
okay.
do love Psychology Today. And I will say this also because they have a great find a therapist tool on Psychology Today where
Oh.
you can put up your zip code and you'll get profiles and descriptions of mental health providers in your area who are on Psychology
Mm,
Today. So that is a really helpful resource, especially if you're looking for that extra support, but also just articles on how do I deal with this issue? It will
yeah.
come up, and there's solid professionals who write for that publication.
Cool. Well, I'll be sure to, I just looked that up. I'll be sure to include that link in the show notes for listeners if they're interested. And then
Yeah.
my final question for you is, what is something you can't stop talking about?
Oh, I mean, I talk a lot about joy and being, oh, you know what I can't stop talking about right now is awe. This idea of awe and wonder. And
Mm,
one thing I encouraged the women on this retreat to do is before you pick up your phone to capture whatever moment that is or whatever
mhm.
image you're looking at, take 5 seconds and make it a moment for you. Step into that awe, be present for even 3 seconds and experience it before we go to our phone. I always say we like to save it before we savor it. But I would
Mm,
love for people to take that 3 seconds, savor it, and then remember it forever on your phone.
that's
I would
so
say
good.
that.
Yes, I love that. Great advice. Great word to wrap it up on. I appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you for having me.